The scariest things are the unknowns. Several years ago, I worked in the prison service and I observed this phenomenon. If one of the guys in custody had been found guilty, he could be in a terrible place while waiting for his sentencing at his next court appearance. I've seen people unable to think about anything, their heads spinning far too much, unable to sleep, off their food and generally completely out of sorts, disorientated, because they were dreading this long sentence. And sometimes they got that full dreaded sentence and I'd be worried thinking, what are they going to be like? They were bad beforehand, they're going to be in a terrible state now. And usually they would be calm. Like, now I know what I'm facing, I can crack on with it. It's the unknowns that are the scariest. It's hard to live with a future where the future is full of really big unknowns beyond our control. Once we know where we're going or what we're doing or what we're up against, no matter how tough it is, we usually find we can get on with it. We might not like it, but a future with some solid facts in it is more bearable than a future entirely made up of shifting unknowns. Today's Gospel reading tells us about the future. Well, it gives us a glimpse of an ultimate future, the ultimate future. What will happen, not in our earthly lives, but in the new creation when truly it is on earth as it is in heaven. And the vision tells us it's going to be mysterious, but wonderful, fantastic. This is how it happened. Jesus goes up to a mountain top to pray, and there with 3 of his disciples, they all catch a vision of that ultimate future, and it is glorious. Jesus is transfigured, his clothes become white as a flash of lightning, and he has a chat with 2 of the greats from Israel's history, with Moses and Elijah. This is not an everyday occurrence, but maybe this is a glimpse of what is to be the future, the ultimate future. It's mind-boggling, it's too much to take in. Simon Peter is just left babbling about making shelters, one for Elijah, one for Jesus and one for Moses. And of course there are theories about this, but personally I like to think he was just overwhelmed. His head was spinning and he resorted to babbling. At the moment, I often find my head spinning because it seems that there are so many unknowns. At this moment in 2004, there are wars in Ukraine, Sudan, Syria, Yemen, and between Israel and Hamas taking place in Gaza, and in other places too. And no one knows how they will end, or when they will end, or how many lives will be ruined before they end. No one knows whether any of these conflicts will spread and draw in other countries and therefore maybe escalate. 2004 is also a year of elections, not just in the UK and in the US. National elections are expected in at least 64 countries. That's almost half the global population do not know who will be leading them in 2025. And of course, there are a lot of fears surrounding this. And in addition, we don't know the speed of climate change. 2023 was globally the hottest year on record. We don't know what 2024 will be like. We don't know if we are heading for long-term irreparable damage. We don't know how close we are to the tipping point, or even if we passed it and haven't noticed it. We don't know if our politicians and business leaders are truly aware and whether they're going to finally take definitive action to start addressing the threat of climate change. All in all, at this moment in 2024, there are a lot of big unknowns around. And I'm going to be honest, I'm scared. It's scary. I think God understands, and I think God gets how an unknown future can be scary. And I think that's why God gave to the disciples and to Jesus this vision of what ultimately lies ahead. This event, the Transfiguration, where Jesus is met by Moses and Elijah, his clothes turn white, and God's own voice is heard saying, "This is my son, my beloved, listen to him." This was God's gift to the disciples and to Jesus, and it was given for a reason. Their future was full of unknowns too. Now, Jesus had more than an inkling of what lay ahead, but in how much detail we can argue back and forth. He told his disciples that he was going to suffer, die, and rise again, but they weren't listening to what they didn't want to hear. But later, when things started getting really challenging, once they were heading for Jerusalem, when Jesus started talking about his body and his blood with bread and wine, when Jesus betrayed him, when Jesus was arrested, maybe then the memory of this event, the Transfiguration, might have been useful for them all. And what about on that Friday night? Imagine the disciples sitting around, unable to take in the horrors of what had just happened. Jesus did not get off. He had been convicted, sentenced, and executed, and in the worst way possible, the most humiliating and awful and painful way. I very much doubt there was any theologizing on that Friday night. I doubt any of them were debating theories of the atonement. The future, now devoid of the big known, their Lord and Master, Jesus, was now filled with complete unknowns, and their heads were spinning. What would they make of the Transfiguration at that moment, had they remembered it? Would it have given them hope that this was not the end, that God still had more for them? Maybe that's the benefit of the Transfiguration for us who call ourselves Christians today. At the start of this year, full of unknowns and some of them rather alarming, the story of the Transfiguration tells us that God is with us, and at the same time God is above and beyond our troubles. The things we fear will sink us, and might sink us, cannot sink God. The end of the story, the end of all the stories, is not going to be an unmitigated disaster, an unending disaster. However bad it gets, God is not abandoning us. Quite the contrary. And surely that's worth clinging on to. Amen.